June 6th, 1944. Dawn breaks over the coast of Normandy. Thousands of ships approach the shore. Not knowing if they will live to see the sunset, the invasion of Europe has begun. But behind the courage and chaos lies a story few truly know, of weather, chance, and fatal mistakes that shape the outcome of D-Day. This is the real story of what went right and what went terribly wrong. To understand D-Day, we must go back to the night before, when one man's decision would change the fate of the war.
Welcome to the Depth Dive. Today we are opening the vault on June 6, 1944, D-Day. It's a day, etched in modern history, often remembered as this pure, overwhelming monolith of Allied force and heroism.
Yeah, that's the popular image, definitely.
Yeah, but if you dig just a little beneath the surface, you find this story that's just riddled with contingency, unbelievable luck, critical blunders, moments where the entire operation just hung by a thread, a single fragile thread.
It really did. Chance played such a huge role.
So our mission today isn't really to retell the battle step by step. You know, the basics, the ships, the beaches.
Right.
Our mission is to excavate the surprising factors, the things that, rarely make it into the standard accounts.
Like the weather dramas.
Exactly.
Right.
The near-fatal meteorological decisions, the tiny, tiny errors that led to catastrophe on places like Omaha, and the profound strategic failures on the German side that, frankly, kind of define the outcome.
Yeah, the German response or lack thereof is key.
We're asking, how much of D-Day was meticulous planning and how much was just pure chaotic chance? And maybe did the Allies, despite this huge success, actually miss their biggest opportunity?
That's a really provocative question, and our source material actually gives us a good framework to tackle it. We're looking at an analysis that dives deep into these hidden variables.
Okay.
It tries to understand if the sheer, overwhelming effort of the Normandy landings resulted in, total unmitigated success, or if the Allies maybe inadvertently left the door open for 11 more months of brutal war.
Right. So let's set the stage a bit. Europe, spring 1944. What's the mixture? Germany still holds immense power, right? Controlling huge parts of the continent.
Oh, absolutely. They were still dominant on the map, but the pressure was definitely building. The whole geopolitical situation was shifting quite dramatically, actually.
Okay.
Hitler still rules from the Atlantic coast deep into Russia, but the Red Army, they were pushing relentlessly in the east. They were already at the borders of Hungary, Finland.
So that Eastern Front was just draining resources.
Massively. This two-front war was bleeding the Wehrmacht dry.
Yeah.
And then in the south, the Western Allies were, they were completely bogged down in Italy.
Right, trying to push north over the Alps. That sounds impossible.
Militarily, it was pretty much prohibitive, really rugged terrain. So the need for a new, viable Western Front wasn't just like a strategic preference. It was a desperate logistical and military necessity. They had to open another front somewhere else.
Which brings us to Normandy.
Well,
why there? It wasn't the shortest crossing point, was it? Pas-de-Calais is much closer to England.
Yeah, and that's exactly why they didn't choose Pas-de-Calais. It was too obvious. The Germans expected it there.
Ah, okay.
Normandy was chosen precisely because it was less obvious, and it offered this perfect, if risky, combination of factors.
Like what?
Well, first, geography and logistics. It was reachable overnight from southern England. That meant they could shuttle troops and supplies back and forth continuously. That was vital.
Makes sense.
Second, and this is crucial, it had these long, sweeping sand beaches. You absolutely need that kind of terrain for an amphibious landing on this scale. We're talking hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles.
And those temporary mulberry harbors they built.
Exactly. They needed space. But the decisive factor, the sources really emphasized this, was that Normandy was significantly less fortified than the coast near Pas-de-Calais.
Because the Germans put their big defenses where they expected the attack.
Precisely. The Atlantic Wall, as they called it, was strongest there. Normandy was seen as, maybe not a weak spot, but certainly a weaker spot. A chance to get ashore before the full weight of the German defenses could react.
So a calculated risk based on deception and geography.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A massive gamble, but one they felt they had to take.
Okay, so pick Normandy. Years of planning, tens of thousands of people ready to go, and the whole thing almost collapses because of the weather. Just the weather.
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? The invasion fleet actually set sail on June 4th. The target was landing on June 5th.
They were already at sea.
Yes, the machine was rolling. But then General Eisenhower, the supreme commander, he gets this weather forecast. And it's bad. Really bad. Rapid, sustained deterioration predicted.
Not just rough seas, I assume.
Rough seas were part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Swamps, the landing craft.
Yeah.
But the specific critical concern was the Allied Air Force. The conditions were forecast to be too poor for the planes to fly effectively.
And without air superiority.
The whole thing was doomed, completely doomed. Air cover was the absolute foundation of the plan. Protecting the fleet, hitting German guns, supporting the troops on the ground. If the planes couldn't fly, they'd be sending those men into a slaughterhouse.
So Ike makes the call.
He makes the terrifying call, halt, return to base.
Wow. Can you imagine being on those landing craft, packed in, probably seasick, nerve shot, and then you get the order to turn back?
The psychological whiplash must have been immense, just devastating for morale.
And it wasn't just a morale issue, was it? That delay created huge risks.
Massive risks, logistical risks, tied to, of all things, the tides. They absolutely had to land mid-morning, right on that cusp between high and low tide.
Why then specifically?
Well, they needed the tide to be receding to expose certain underwater obstacles that Germans had planted, but still high enough for the landing craft to actually get close to the shore. It was a very narrow window.
Okay.
Delaying meant they missed that window.
Oh.
And that had two huge potential consequences. First, unloading everyone, reloading. That took time. Risked being spotted by German reconnaissance. The element of surprise could be lost.
Right.
Second, waiting for the next suitable combination of tide and weather. That could mean waiting weeks for the Germans to potentially figure things out and strengthen defenses.
So the pressure was immense, but then they get a break, a lifeline.
You have an unscheduled lifeline. It comes down to the meteorologists. Allied meteorologists working under incredible pressure. They detect something. A short, temporary improvement.
Just a small window.
A very small window. The sources call it an intermediate high. Basically, a little ridge of high pressure that would pass through, giving them just enough calm weather for the crucial few hours. Specifically, the night of June 5th and the morning of June 6th.
Was it a sure thing?
Not at all. It wasn't a perfect forecast. It was a gamble on a brief reprieve in the storm. Eisenhower consulted his team, led by Group Captain James Stagg. They were apparently split.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but Stagg, the chief meteorologist, he was persuasive. He convinced Eisenhower this brief window was their only real shot. Any further delay was just too dangerous.
And Eisenhower takes the gamble.
He does. Famously says something like, I don't like it, but it seems to be the best available. He issues the order, okay, let's go. He seized the moment, took the risk. Waiting was just seen as even riskier.
And this Allied gamble is amplified by a huge German blunder on the weather front. They saw the same initial bad weather, right?
They did. But their forecasting model wasn't as good, especially short-term. They didn't have the weather stations in the Atlantic, like Greenland, that the Allies did. So they were basically flying blind about incoming systems.
So their forecast was just bad weather continuing.
Pretty much. They predicted conditions would remain too rough for any major landing attempt, especially impacting air operations. They felt secure.
Which leads to this incredible historical irony. Key German commanders leaving their posts.
It's staggering. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the guy in charge of coastal defense, the architect of the Atlantic Wall, he was one of them.
He left. Where did he go?
He felt so confident in the bad weather forecast that he decided it was a good time to travel to southern Germany.
Why?
To see his wife.
Why?
June 6th was her 50th birthday. He also planned to go see Hitler, plead for more control over the panzer divisions he felt were crucial for defense.
The fate of the Western Front potentially hanging on a birthday trip. It's
unbelievable. But it gets worse. Even when the German meteorologists did start noticing that same brief clearing, that intermediate high the Allies saw.
They saw it too.
Eventually, yes. But the German command structure, which Hitler had deliberately made complex and overlapping, just choked. The staff officers who got the updated, slightly better forecast, they didn't dare recall the big bosses.
They didn't want to bother Rommel.
Exactly. Interrupting Field Marshal Rommel for what still seemed like just a possibility of invasion based on a shaky weather update. That was a career killer. They wouldn't risk it.
So Rommel's away.
Rommel's away. Other senior commanders were off attending war games or training exercises in Brittany. The whole defensive apparatus, which was designed to smash any invasion on the beaches within the first 24 hours, was basically headless. Left in the hands of subordinates who didn't have the authority, or maybe the nerve, to act decisively.
What a mess.
A total mess. The conclusion drawn in the analysis is just devastating. German preparations during those critical hours, June 4th, 5th, 6th, were just a single game of failure, bad luck, and mishaps. It was pure chance, a massive stroke of luck for the Allies.
Okay, so the weather holds, just barely. The huge fleet, over 1,200 warships, approaches the Normandy coast. And the first wave isn't the boats, it's the paratroopers, right? Dropping in the dark.
That's right, the pre-dawn strike. 2 American divisions, 1 British, dropped overnight behind the beaches.
What was their main job?
Chaos and control. Secure strategic points bridges, crossroads on the eastern and western flanks of the landing zones. Basically, sow confusion among the Germans and prevent them from easily reinforcing the beaches.
Was it successful?
Broadly, yes. It was chaotic, landings were scattered, they took heavy losses, but they did achieve the main goal. They definitely alarmed the German defenders and tied up resources.
But it also alerted the Germans that something big was happening.
Immediately, the Germans realized this wasn't just a raid. So the defenders on the beaches, they manned their positions in force, ready for what came next.
Which was phase 2, the massive bombardment, naval guns, bombers. So it's just pulverized the German defenses.
Yeah, shell the German positions until they were ready to storm was the idea. And for 4 of the 5 landing beaches, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword, it worked, more or less. The bombardment was effective enough where the defenses were weaker, allowing the troops to get ashore relatively quickly.
But then there's Omaha. Omaha Beach, the American sector. That became the exception, the horrifying exception.
It's the defining trauma of D-Day.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand that a tiny, almost microscopic technical error led to this macroscopic tragedy.
Where is the error?
It boils down to a 3-second delay. Just 3 seconds.
3 seconds? How could that make such a difference?
It was the bomber pilots. The heavy bombers, the B-24s, flying high above. The cloud cover over the coast was really dense and low that morning. The pilots were worried. They feared that if they released their bombs exactly on schedule, the bombs might fall short due to the cloud distortion or drift and land right on top of their own landing craft coming ashore, hitting their own guys.
The ultimate friendly fire fear.
Exactly. The fog of war, literally. So, as a precaution, they delayed the bomb release by just 3 seconds to make absolutely sure they cleared the beachhead area.
Okay, a safety measure, but...
But those 3 seconds meant the bombs overshot. They landed miles inland, like 12 kilometers south.
12 kilometers?
Yeah. The sources have this grimly funny line about how the bombs killed a few Norman cows, but they did absolutely nothing to the German defenses on Omaha Beach itself. Those positions, the bunkers, the machine gun nests, they were left largely intact. And the defenders, nearly 1,000 hardened German soldiers, were ready and waiting.
So an act of caution completely negated the whole point of the bombardment there.
Completely. And to make matters worse, Omaha itself was just geographically a nightmare compared to the other beaches. It was just perfectly suited for defense. It was more heavily fortified than Allied intelligence had realized, with concrete bunkers interlocking fields of fire. But the terrain was the real killer. A steep bluff, a cliff face, rising up sharply from the beach.
So the Germans were firing down.
Exactly. The defenders were about 30 meters higher than the attacking American infantry struggling through the surf and sand. It gave them a devastating, almost completely protected field of fire. Landing on Omaha was like trying to storm the base of a natural fortress.
And the accounts from the first waves, they're just pure horror. The sources call it hell.
And rightly so.
Oh.
Machine guns opening fire the second the landing ramps dropped. Men cut down on the water on the wet sand, staggering casualties right from the start. An entire company could be wiped out in minutes.
You mentioned the German perspective, too. What was it like for them?
It's chilling. These weren't all elite SS troops, mind you. Many were older conscripts or Osttruppen recruits from occupied Eastern Europe. But they were in strong defensive positions, fighting for their lives. One account describes just seeing waves of enemies storming towards him, thinking it's them or me, just firing continuously.
The sheer scale of it must have been shocking for them, too.
Definitely. One German machine gunner, Heinrich Severloh, later claimed he fired something like 12,000 rounds that morning alone. They apparently couldn't comprehend why more waves kept coming when the beach was already just covered in American bodies and burning equipment.
There's a horrific anecdote about a Sergeant Robinson being cut in half by machine gun fire while praying.
Just unimaginable. Did the Allied command realize how bad it was?
Oh, yes. The losses were so high, so quickly, that commanders seriously considered abandoning the Omaha landing altogether, diverting the follow-up waves to Utah or one of the British beaches.
But they didn't? No. It was a moment of absolute crisis. But the beachhead at Omaha was strategically vital. They couldn't just give it up, so they made a very high-risk decision instead.
Which was?
Push the Navy destroyers in close, dangerously close to the shore, almost suicidal distances given the potential for shore fire, and use their main guns, the big 5-inch naval guns, like direct-fire artillery, against the surviving German strongpoints.
So the ships became point-blank artillery.
Essentially, yes, blasting the concrete bunkers at extremely close range. The thinking was the German defenders were isolated, they couldn't be resupplied easily. Eventually, they'd run out of ammunition, they'd run out of men, and it worked, slowly. By the afternoon, small groups of Americans, led by surviving officers and NCOs who just took charge in the chaos, managed to find ways up the bluffs, flanking the remaining positions.
So they eventually broke through.
They did. The last German strongpoints were overcome by mid-afternoon.
Yeah.
But the cost was enormous. Omaha accounted for the vast majority of Allied casualties on D-Day.
But you made a point earlier about the narrative. Omaha wasn't the entire story of D-Day, or even the entire story of Omaha Beach itself.
That's a really important clarification the sources make. Yes, the iconic image of Omaha, the one seared into our minds by films like Saving Private Ryan, that intense nonstop slaughter, that narrative is heavily concentrated on one specific German resistance nest, Widerstands Nest 62, which held out incredibly stubbornly until the afternoon.
Okay, so other parts of Omaha weren't as bad.
Well, bad is relative. It was brutal everywhere. But in other sectors of Omaha Beach, American troops did manage to breach the defenses and push inland much earlier, some by 9 or 10 in the morning. So while Omaha was absolutely the bloodiest and most difficult landing, making it the exception to the relative success elsewhere, even within Omaha, the picture of total beach-wide paralysis until the afternoon isn't quite accurate. It was the hardest fight, but pockets of success happened earlier. It was the exception, not the rule, for D-Day overall.
Okay, so despite the absolute hell of Omaha, by the afternoon of June 6th, the Allies had secured footholds on all 5 beaches. They landed something like 150,000 men, thousands of tanks, jeeps, trucks. A monumental achievement.
Absolutely monumental. And that consolidation, that ability to get established before being pushed back into the sea, was possible, in large part, because of a truly catastrophic strategic blunder by the German High Command.
Right. This is where we get into the delayed counterattack. There's this famous story about Hitler sleeping late.
Yeah, the Hitler was asleep narrative. It's partially true he was hard to wake, but it's often overstated as the sole reason for the delay of the Panzer reserves. Rommel, when he finally got back late that afternoon, did find his key tank divisions were being held back.
But it wasn't just Hitler's nap.
No, the real problem was more structural, and it involved the commander on the spot. The decisive figure causing the initial critical delay was Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. He was the Oberbefehlshaber, the supreme commander in Western Europe.
And he hesitated, even after the paratroopers landed.
He hesitated. Even when it was clear paratroopers were down, confirming this was serious, not just a coastal raid, Rundstedt held back the key mobile reserves. He had some infantry he could move, but the crucial units, the armored panzer divisions needed to smash the beachheads, they were under a different command structure.
Who controlled them?
They were ultimately subordinate directly to OKW, the German High Command, which basically meant Hitler. Rundstedt needed Hitler's explicit permission to commit them to battle.
And he didn't ask for that permission right away.
He didn't request their release until about 2 p.m. on June 6th, hours after the landings had started.
Why? Why did Rundstedt, the top general there, wait so long? What was he thinking?
He was completely fooled, utterly convinced by arguably the most brilliant deception operation of the entire war, Operation Fortitude.
Ah, the Ghost Army.
Exactly. Rundstedt was convinced that Normandy was just a feint, a massive diversionary attack designed purely to draw German reserves south, away from the real target.
Which he thought was?
The Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. Logically, it seemed the most likely spot for the main invasion effort.
And the Allies leaned into that belief, didn't they? They didn't just let him think it. They actively encouraged it.
Oh, they orchestrated it masterfully. They created an entire fictional army group, FCOs, First United States Army Group, supposedly poised in Kent, right opposite Calais.
Under Patton, right, whom the Germans really respected or feared.
Precisely. They put General George S. Patton, known for his aggression, in nominal command of this phantom army. They built inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft in the ports, fake barracks. Critically, they generated enormous amounts of fake radio traffic, simulating the preparations for a massive invasion force.
So German intelligence was picking all this up.
They were swallowing it whole, They even used double agents, like the famous Agent Garbo, to feed the German high command reports confirming the existence and intent of usage. German aerial reconnaissance saw the decoys, intercepted the radio chatter. It all pointed to Pas de Calais.
So Rundstedt felt he had to keep his best units, the Panzers, further north.
He felt absolutely compelled to. He held back powerful divisions, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Corps, waiting to meet the real invasion he was sure was coming near Calais. He couldn't risk committing them to Normandy if it was just a sideshow.
But the sources raise a really interesting point here. Shouldn't Rundstedt and the German leadership generally have known better based on past experience?
That's the sharp critique. They'd already faced major Allied landings in North Africa, Sicily, and mainland Italy in 43 and early 44. 3 big ones.
And what was the pattern there?
In all 3 of those Italian campaigns, the Allies used deception operations, yes, to try and mislead the Germans about the exact landing spot. But they never followed up the main landing with a second, equally large invasion somewhere else. The feints were just feints. The main landing was the main landing.
So the lesson should have been clear. When the Allies land in force, that is the main event. Hit it hard, hit it fast.
Exactly. The lesson should have been, if you hesitate, if you hold back your reserves waiting for something else, you lose your only chance to repel the landing. The only chance Germany ever had was to throw everything they had, especially the Panzers, at the beaches immediately within the first few hours.
That old military maxim, he who wants to defend everything defends nothing.
Precisely. Wer alles verteidigen will, verteidigt nichts. They ignored it. They held back their best forces for a phantom army attacking a location the Allies never intended to hit. By the time Rundstedt finally asked for the Panzers around 2 p.m. and OKW released them pretty quickly via remote command,
Yeah.
it was just too late.
Why too late? They were released eventually.
Because by then, the Allies were ashore in strength, consolidating their beachheads. And critically, Allied air superiority was absolute. Those panzer divisions couldn't just race to the coast.
The air power factor again.
It was devastating. Trying to move large armored columns during daylight hours under skies completely dominated by Allied fighter bombers was suicidal. Any significant movement was spotted instantly and attacked relentlessly.
So the delay wasn't just hours on the clock. It meant they missed the window before air power pinned them down.
Exactly. It essentially paralyzed any large-scale, rapid German counter-movement during the crucial first day. Anecdotes from German soldiers at the time speak of this profound, crippling demoralization. Seeing the sky filled with Allied planes, not a single German fighter in the sky, no anti-aircraft fire, nothing. They felt completely exposed, pinned down, just watching the Allies build up their strength almost unchallenged.
So the analysis concludes that the weather was the only thing that could have stopped the landing, and once that held...
Once the weather gamble paid off for the Allies, the German strategic failures, Rundstedt's hesitation, fueled by the Pas de Calais deception, basically sealed the fate of the landing. The beachheads were secure.
So the invasion succeeds, the beachheads are established, but the fighting in Normandy becomes this brutal slog. The Germans pour reinforcements in, but they're facing overwhelming numbers and firepower.
It was a brutal attritional battle in the Normandy hedgerows. Something like 400,000 German troops trying to hold back what would rapidly grow to over 1.5 million Allied soldiers, backed by total air supremacy and immense artillery.
And this hopeless situation, it seems, really pushes some commanders to a breaking point, especially Rommel, who was once Hitler's favorite general.
Absolutely. Rommel was a dedicated soldier, yes, but he was also a military pragmatist. When he got back to Normandy, saw the panzers had been held back, witnessed the devastating effect of Allied air power firsthand. He understood the operational reality. The situation was militarily hopeless.
And he didn't just keep this to himself.
No. His frustration and realization led to a remarkable transformation. It wasn't just whispers among staff. It's evidenced by a formal official document he drafted just over a month after D-Day.
This is the one sent directly to Hitler on July 15th, 1944.
That's the one, titled innocuously Considerations on the Situation. But the content, buried in formal military language, was absolutely explosive.
What did it say, basically?
The core message was unmistakable. He stated, quote, "The unequal struggle is nearing its end. In my opinion, it is necessary to draw consequences from this situation."
Draw consequences, meaning?
Meaning the war is lost, Führer. We need to end it. Implicitly demanding peace negotiations, an end to the hostilities on the Western Front. For a German field marshal, especially one with Rommel's profile, to put that in writing, officially, to Hitler.
That took incredible courage. In that regime, saying the war was lost was treason.
It was an act of extraordinary military courage, as the source describes it, rare in German history at that time. It showed he was moving beyond just complaining. He was formally stating the futility and demanding action. He knew it meant senseless sacrifice to continue.
But he must have known Hitler wouldn't listen.
He probably suspected, yes, which likely pushed him towards an even more radical conclusion. He realized telling Hitler the truth wouldn't work. Something else had to be done.
And we have evidence of that radicalization, right?
Yeah.
Just days later.
Yes, definitive evidence. Just 3 days before the famous July 20th bomb plot against Hitler, led by Colonel von Stauffenberg,
What happened?
Rommel met with another general, Heinrich Eberbach. Now, Eberbach was later captured by the British, and his private conversations in captivity were secretly recorded.
Ah, the bugged conversations.
Exactly. And Eberbach reported on that meeting with Rommel. He said Rommel was very sharp, very direct, and stated explicitly, quote, "Hitler must be killed, and we must then open the front in the West
Wow. Not just arrested, but killed.
and negotiate with the West."
Killed. That's the crucial part. It shows Rommel had fully joined the resistance conspiracy. As the source puts it, he joined 3 minutes before 12. He wasn't talking about arresting Hitler anymore. He was advocating assassination to enable an immediate, separate peace with the Western Allies.
He saw it as the only way out.
Apparently so. He was fully committed to the coup. But then, fate intervened in that characteristically brutal Normandy way.
What happened to Rommel? Just 3 days before the July 20th plot was due to happen. So, on July 17th, Rommel was returning from the front lines in his staff car, Allied fighter plane, strafing attack.
Yeah.
A common hazard for any German vehicle moving during the day due to that total air supremacy we talked about. His car was hit, crashed, he was severely injured, major head wounds, fractured skull. He was completely incapacitated, unconscious for days, rendered totally inactive on the crucial day, July 20th, when the bomb plot went ahead.
Well, we can only guess what might have happened if he had been active. His name carried so much weight.
He was seen by many conspirators as the indispensable figure, the one man with a public prestige to potentially rally the army and the nation after Hitler's removal. His absence was a huge blow to the plot's chances of success beyond Stauffenberg's initial bombing.
And even though he played no active part on the day, he was still implicated later.
Yes. As the Gestapo investigation unfolded after the failed plot, his name came up. Connections were made. Rather than risk a public trial of Germany's most popular soldier, which would be terrible for regime morale, Hitler's henchmen offered Rommel a grim choice:
What was the choice?
commit suicide quietly using cyanide. In return, they promised his family would be unharmed, and his reputation as a war hero would be preserved publicly. He'd be announced as dying from his wounds. The alternative was a show trial, public disgrace for him, and likely persecution for his family.
And he chose suicide.
He didn't. In October 1944, his fate really underscores how the disaster unfolding in Normandy convinced even the highest, most respected figures in the German military that the war was not only lost, but that Hitler himself had to be removed to end it.
Okay, so the plot fails, Rommel is gone. But on the battlefield, after weeks of grinding attritional warfare in the hedgerows, the Allies finally break out. Late July 1944.
Yes, Operation Cobra. The American breakout, it finally shatters the German front line in Normandy.
And then the momentum seems unstoppable for a while. Driving across France, Paris liberated by August 24th. From the outside, this looks like a massive, decisive victory unfolding.
It was a huge success, absolutely. A strategic victory of enormous proportions. But the sources we're looking at, and quite a few historians writing since, argue that even this great success was also, simultaneously, a profound mischance.
A mischance. How? They were racing towards Germany.
They argue the success could have been even more decisive, that it could have potentially shortened the war by many months.
Okay, where did this supposed failure happen? What went wrong if they were liberating Paris?
Two key errors are usually highlighted, mostly tactical and logistical, happening right in the wake of the breakout. First, the failure to completely close the Falaise pocket.
The Falaise pocket? What was that?
As the Germans retreated after the breakout, a huge portion of their forces in Normandy Army Group B, maybe over 250,000 men, initially got squeezed into a shrinking pocket around the town of Falaise. The Allies had the chance to completely encircle and annihilate them.
But they didn't.
They almost did. But they left a crucial escape route, the famous Falaise Gap, open for just a bit too long. Miscommunication, maybe caution between the converging Allied pincers. Whatever the reason, a significant number of German troops, maybe around 100,000, managed to escape the trap.
And why was letting them escape so critical?
Because These weren't raw recruits. They were experienced, battle-hardened soldiers. They lost most of their heavy equipment, yes, but the manpower escaped. They were able to retreat, regroup, and form the core of a new defensive line along Germany's border, the West Wall or Siegfried Line. Had those 100,000 troops been captured at Falaise, the argument goes, the Western approach to Germany would have been virtually wide open.
Wow. Okay, so that's error number one, the incomplete encirclement. What was this?
The second was logistics.
Yeah.
As the Allies raced across France with incredible speed, they basically outran their supply lines.
They were moving too fast.
In a sense, yes. Too
Yeah.
fast for the supply system supporting them. And the most critical failure here was neglecting to capture and, crucially, open major deepwater ports quickly enough.
Why were the ports so vital? Couldn't they keep using the Normandy beaches and the Mulberry harbors?
Only up to a point. The beaches and the artificial harbors could handle a certain amount of tonnage. But supplying multiple field armies advancing hundreds of miles into enemy territory requires vastly more fuel, ammunition, food, everything. You need huge, established deepwater ports that can handle the massive ocean-going freighters coming directly from the U.S. and Britain.
Which ports were key?
Cherbourg was captured relatively early, but the Germans wrecked the harbor facilities so thoroughly it took weeks to repair. The really big prize was Antwerp in Belgium. It had huge, intact port facilities. But due to a combination of factors, including the failure of Operation Market Garden, which was partly aimed at securing the approaches, Antwerp wasn't fully operational for Allied shipping until late November 1944.
Months after the breakout.
Months, and this created the infamous Allied supply crisis of autumn 1944.
The logistical bottleneck.
Exactly. They simply couldn't get enough supplies forward to the front lines to sustain a powerful, continuous offensive deep into Germany. They famously created the Red Ball Express, this heroic round-the-clock truck convoy system running from Normandy, but it was just a Band-Aid. Trucks couldn't match the volume ships docking at Antwerp could deliver.
So the Allied offensive essentially ran out of gas.
It sputtered to a halt near the German border in late 1944, not because of German resistance alone, though that stiffened, but significantly due to lack of fuel and ammunition.
And this leads to that really startling counterfactual argument, the Christmas 1944 scenario.
It's a compelling what-if. The argument is, if the bulk of the German army had been destroyed at Falaise, leaving the West Wall undermanned, and if the supply problems had been solved much earlier by quickly securing Antwerp, then it's entirely possible the Allies could have pushed deep into the German Reich by September or October 1944.
Ending the war by Christmas 44.
That's the controversial suggestion made by some historians and reflected in these sources, that the war in Europe could potentially have ended 6 months earlier than it did.
Instead, 11 more months of brutal fighting passed between D-Day in June 44 and the final German capitulation in May 1945.
11 months. Hundreds of thousands more lives lost on all sides, continued devastation across Europe, and crucially perhaps, allowing the Soviet Red Army to advance much deeper into Central Europe.
Which brings up that even broader historical question. Okay, D-Day was huge, but was it the decisive moment of the entire Second World War in Europe?
That's where perspective really matters. Many historians, probably the majority now, offer a strong counter-argument. They say the war in Europe was fundamentally decided much earlier.
When?
Autumn 1941. Maybe winter 41-42 at the latest. The moment Hitler's Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, failed to achieve quick victory before winter set in.
The failure outside Moscow.
Exactly. That failure meant Germany was locked into a protracted two-front war against the immense industrial and manpower resources of the Soviet Union in the East, and the rapidly mobilizing industrial might of the United States and the British Empire in the West. From late 1941 onwards, many argue, it became a war of attrition that Germany simply could not win mathematically. They couldn't sustain the losses or match the production of their enemies on both fronts simultaneously.
So if the war was essentially decided back in 41, what was the ultimate role, the significance of D-Day in 44?
I think the consensus view, and what the sources suggest, is quite pragmatic. While the war's ultimate outcome might have been decided earlier, it still had to be won. Victory wasn't automatic.
D-Day was about how and when the victory was achieved.
Precisely. The successful landing in Normandy was an extremely important milestone, as the analysis puts it. It was a crucial step that opened the long-awaited Second Front in Western Europe. This forced Germany to divert critical resources away from the Eastern Front, relieving pressure on the Soviets, and ultimately led to the pincer movement that crushed the Reich between East and West. It didn't necessarily decide the war, but it massively accelerated the end and shaped the post-war map. It was the essential act that turned a decided outcome into a realized victory. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. It really forces you to reconsider D-Day, doesn't it? This event we see as this inevitable tide of overwhelming force, realizing it hinged on such a knife-edge combination of, well, human decisions, tiny technical errors, and just sheer dumb luck.
It really does. That's the value of digging into these analyses, I think. If we boil down the most surprising takeaways for you, the listener, it probably comes down to three really contingent factors that played massive roles. First, that incredibly narrow weather window. That intermediate high the Allied meteorologists found, the gamble Eisenhower took, and the simultaneous failure of the German command, paralyzed by Rommel's absence and bad forecasts, to react. Fate hung on that weather call.
Right, the birthday trip factor.
Exactly. Second, the anomaly of Omaha Beach. Understanding that its horrific cost was largely due to that tiny 3-second delay in the bombing, which left defenses intact, making Omaha the brutal exception, not the rule for the landings that day. And even within Omaha, the story is more complex than just total failure until the afternoon.
Okay, whether Omaha's specific failure.
What's the third?
Third, the sheer scale and success of the Allied deception Operation Fortitude, the Rubber Army, and how completely it fooled the German leadership, particularly Rundstedt. His hesitation, holding back the panzers for the real invasion at Calais that never came. That strategic blunder gave the Allies the crucial hours they needed to get ashore and stay ashore. So, a brief storm clearing, a field marshal's birthday plans, 3 seconds of pilot caution, a fake army. These tiny contingent things were just as crucial in their own way as the millions of soldiers and the thousands of ships and planes. It really drives home how fragile history can be.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you to mull over, drawing directly from that mischance argument in the sources.
Okay.
If the Allies had managed to slam the door shut at Falaise, destroying that German army, and if they'd secured Antwerp quickly, solving the supply crisis, and if the war had ended by Christmas 1944, 6 months earlier,
Yeah.
how might the whole map of post-war Europe look different? Think about the geopolitics. Where would the Soviet Red Army have stopped? Would the Iron Curtain have fallen where it did? Consider the immense political consequences, not just the tragic human cost, of those extra 11 months of war that the missed opportunity potentially allowed.
Something to think about.